everyone, it's Monica, and today I am so excited because I am finally going to be doing a new recent reads video. So basically most of last year, really, pretty much all of last year, I was really bad at doing like reading wrap-ups, recent read type of videos. I've talked about this previously, but my reading last year was just really inconsistent, and so I just never felt like doing a full reading wrap-up. So I just sort of like talked about the books that I was reading when I could talk about them. So I'm really excited to be back doing recent reads. It's something that if you've watched some of my other recent videos, you'll know that I've been doing this thing called Readuary, which is where I set a goal to read pretty much every single day of January for 30 minutes. Now, some days I haven't been able to read for the full 30 minutes, but pretty much every single day this month, except for like a couple of days, like maybe 2 days, I have read. And that has been such a life changer for me. Reading is back to being this like actual life habit as opposed to something that I do every once in a while. And that's been really amazing. My reading throughout this month has been so good. So I wanted to share some of the books that I recently read because I want to try and keep these videos to about 5 books, and I am now over 5 books. So gonna talk about those. So we are going to start with the first book that I read this year, and I'm so happy that this was my first book because oh boy was it a ride, and that is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This book is now out. This book has been getting a ton of hype. Basically it is a fairy book. It follows Jude, who when she is a child, this man comes and murders her parents and takes her and her sisters away and raises them as his own children. And so she grows up a human in the fairy world, which is very political and cutthroat, and this entire book is very twisty and cutthroat. I will say that when I first started reading this book, I wasn't super into it. I actually thought that I wasn't going to like it because I kind of thought, not that it was boring, it's just that what I thought it was going to be isn't what it ended up being. You know, I started reading it and basically for a huge chunk of the book, it is sort of like this kind of school book where, you know, she's in class and there are these bullies, and it's just like that wasn't really what I had signed up for. But so it's not for a little while that like all the political court intrigue comes in, but once that starts, the book just takes off and it becomes such a roller coaster. I loved all of the characters, and I would say that like now that I have finished the entire book, all of the sort of build up that happened at the beginning, like I appreciate it a lot more at the end. I'm so excited to see where this story goes. This is also one that has such a good like slow burn, like unsatisfactory but like in a good way romance. Like it's just so good, and I've heard it compared to like Game of Thrones but like fairies, and I would say that's like a good comparison. Definitely not as large as Game of Thrones is. You're only really following one character throughout this whole book, but definitely sort of there is a bit of that tone to it, and it's definitely very political. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. So this one's already out. If you haven't heard tons of things about it already, I'm sure you will be, because I feel like everyone has been reading this one lately. So yeah, really glad that I finally read this. After that, I picked up one of my other most anticipated books for this year, and that is Beneath the Sugar Sky by Seanan McGuire. I adore this series. This is part of the Wayward Children series, and this book is also out. This is the 3rd book in the novella series. I thought it was going to be the last one, but I saw like a tweet reply from her saying basically that as long as they keep selling well, I think she's going to keep writing more. So I'm hoping that these continue to do as well as they have done, and that we will get more of these because, oh, these books are so good. If you are not familiar with this series, I'm sure you are, but if you're not, it follows children who have all fallen into different worlds. So think like Alice in Wonderland or Peter Pan, but this follows other children, not those, who have fallen into different sort of magical nonsense, sometimes very dark worlds, and they're places where these children have all felt at home, and then they, for one reason or another, get sent back to the real world and can't cope. And so they are sent to this boarding home school place where they're basically taken care of, and their parents think that they're basically there to get therapy in order to go back to their normal lives, but they're really there to sort of be around other people who have experienced similar things. This novella is the third in the series. Each one is in the same world and follows the same characters, but different characters are the main characters, and they're each sort of like spin-offs basically. I would definitely recommend reading them in order because I think you get to know different characters, especially the first book. You should for sure read the first book first because I think that makes the other two books make more sense, but they don't like follow, like you're not reading basically one arc across the series. This book is a quest. In the first book in this series, a character is killed, and in this book we follow a descendant of that character trying to figure out what happened because their nonsense world is now like in chaos because of that. And their nonsense world is kind of like a Candyland sort of place, and it's very whimsical, but there's definitely a thread of darkness running through it also at the same time. One of the things that I love about this book and the series in general is the representation. For example, one of the main characters is fat, and the author doesn't shy away from that, and she does a really good job of just writing that character and bringing up all these like truths that are like things that people just don't talk about in books, and I feel like Seanan McGuire does that in all of these books for all the representation. Yeah, I just adore the series. I hope it continues because I just want to read all of the books in this world. So many. I just feel like there's so much to be done in this world, and I hope it never ends. I really do, because it's so good. Then I picked up Snot Girl by Brian Lee O'Malley, and this was so much fun. This follows a girl who is a fashion blogger, and she portrays having the perfect life on social media, but in reality she has really like horrific allergies and is also just like a total mess of a person. And there's this sort of like kind of weird thriller plot that runs throughout this book, but then it's also just like really funny because you're like reading about her blogger, like fashion blogger experiences, which I'm not a fashion blogger, but there are things that they talk about in this book that I just think like if you use social media like a lot, you'll find funny. I adore this. The art especially is like just so fun and bright and everything. I love it so much. I love the different types of fashion bloggers in here. Cute Girl is my favorite. I want to be her. She's wonderful. But yeah, this was so much fun. I am so excited for the second volume, which I think comes out soon, or maybe it's already out. I'm not sure. I have to look into that, but I definitely want to read it because I want to know what happens next because it definitely ends on a cliffhanger. Then, because of The Cruel Prince, I was definitely in a dark YA fantasy mood, so I finally picked up Forest of 1,000 Lanterns by Julie C. Dow, and I loved this book. This is a retelling of the Snow White story, but like the origin story of the evil queen, but from an East Asian perspective, and oh my goodness, it's so good. I am so hit or miss with sort of villain origin stories because I feel like sometimes it's either that the book makes them too sympathetic and then it's like not a villain origin story anymore, or it's just like impossible. They just make them too villainous, you know, where it's they don't really have a driving force or anything. You're just sort of like supposed to assume like, oh, this person is evil from birth. But what I love about this story is that that's not the case. The story follows Shifeng, who lives with her aunt in the countryside, and she was born in poverty, but she is stunning, and her aunt has foretold her future that she will one day be empress, but in order to do that she has to embrace the darkness within, and this is basically that story, and it's so well done. I feel like the plotting of this book was just really good. And you know, it's weird because you definitely, at least I definitely rooted for her and even related to her. There's so much about her predicament and her story that like you definitely sympathize with her at some points. Like this book was just really different to read and just again so much fun. I really recommend picking it up. I'm so excited for the second book. I think it comes out this year. I'm hoping it does because I just want to read it. I want to know what happens next. Oh, it was great. The next two books I read as audiobooks, and they are both Holly Black books. The first one is The Darkest Part of the Forest by Holly Black. Obviously, I just said that these are both Holly Black books. But this one I think is my favorite Holly Black book, at least of all of the Holly Black books that I have read. I think the only ones I have left are like the ones that she's written like for City of Bones or with Cassandra Clare, and then the Tith series. But this book is just amazing. I will say that I would recommend reading The Darkest Part of the Forest before The Cruel Prince, just because they both take place in the same world, and there's like a moment in The Cruel Prince that throws back to The Darkest Part of the Forest. You don't have to read them. Like, I read them out of order and I'm fine, and I loved my reading experience of The Darkest Part of the Forest. I'm just saying that if you don't want to be spoiled for anything, should probably read The Darkest Part of the Forest first. But definitely they're very, very different books. They follow completely different characters in a completely different part of this world. This takes place in a village in modern day that is aware of the existence of fairies, and they just sort of live their lives like as though it's just sort of like this, you know, side caution, you know, just make sure not to go too deep into the forest. And in this town, in the forest in this town, there is a glass coffin that a prince lives in or sleeps in, and he has slept there for decades. No one knows where he came from or how to open the casket. People have tried to break it a variety of ways, and they always end up like cursed. And it follows these two teens who have just both sort of lived their lives like pretending like they're on quests and like they're going to rescue the prince, and one day the prince ends up disappearing from his coffin, and it follows them trying to find him and figure out what's going on. And this one, it's just so fantastical, and it honestly just felt like a very modern fairy tale, you know. Like, I loved all the characters and I loved all the relationships. It's just like everything about this book was so well done, and I would love this one as a movie. I feel like it'd be so amazing and beautiful, because it has all the like modern elements, but at the same time it has this very like magical storybook feel to it. And I loved that sort of like mishmash. And sometimes I read things like that and I kind of find it to be a little bit awkward, but I thought that it was just so well done in this book. I'll also add that there is a gay love story in this book, and it's lovely and wonderful. It's my favorite part about the book. So definitely something to keep in mind if that's something that you're looking for. If you want like a fairy tale, which, like, if you want like a queer fairy tale, this is your book. It's so good. I loved it. It was great. And then the last book that I read, again, another Holly Black book, is The Coldest Book, or The Coldest Girl in Cold Town. This is a vampire book, and I went into this a little bit hesitant because I'm not really into vampires and usually not super into those like stories. And I will say that this like does have some of those vampire tropes in it, that like sort of kind of insta-love trope. And I will say that like the plotting in this isn't as amazing as The Darkest Part of the Forest or The Cruel Prince. However, this book is so much fun. Kind of reminds me of This Savage Song, to be honest. Basically, vampirism is public, everyone knows about it, and in order to contain it, people have created these different cities that are they're basically prison cities, and that's where vampires live, and that's where people put vampires, and other humans can volunteer to go there if they want, either because they've been bit and they, you know, are worried that they're going to become a vampire, or because they have some weird fascination with vampires, or just like want to live forever and think that vampires will turn them. This book follows Tana, who at the start of the book wakes up at a party, and everyone there has been murdered by vampires, and the only survivors are her ex-boyfriend, who has been bitten and so could turn, and herself, and then a mysterious other boy who is also there and chained up. The three of them end up going on this like race against time, basically, to try and get to one of these walled cities, or cold towns as they're called in the book. I do think that she brings something very new to the whole vampire genre that I really enjoyed. And then also there is trans rep in the book, which is cool, and bi rep. But yeah, really enjoyed this one. Definitely recommend checking it out if you are in the market for a very different, fun vampire book. So yeah, those are the books that I have read recently. I would love to know if you've read any of them. Let's discuss them in the comments down below, or let me know what books you've read recently that you've really enjoyed. I'd love to check them out, and I'll talk to y'all next time. Bye!